So with that, and again, ask questions or raise your hand if you've got a question by chat, and then we'll take breaks. So Greg Lang is a member of the Missouri River Joint Board and has got the background of how this came about, and would be here to introduce our speaker and our guest and the background therein. So Greg, if you would unmute, I will mute myself.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to see how many have joined us for the presentation. I really do believe that what Dr. Hearne will provide, you'll find both interesting and I think we'll all find quite useful in our work for water. My role this morning is, as Lance has suggested, is both introduce Dr. Hearne, but also give you a little background of how we came to contract with him for these services, and to explain a little bit who the Missouri River Joint Water Board is and how we came to do this, to partner with Garrison Diversion Conservancy District for this literature review that Dr. Hearne is going to be talking about in just a couple minutes. First of all, the Missouri River Joint Water Board was formed back in 2005. It consists of most of the county water resource boards along the Missouri River. Its purpose is to provide a cooperative and a coordinated effort to address the management of the Missouri River and to protect North Dakota's interests in that great resource. The MRJWB, or Joint Board as it's often known, has argued for a long time, along with other agencies of the state, that North Dakota has experienced a lot more costs than benefits from the Sloan project that built all the dams, created the reservoirs along the Missouri River. However, we've come to realize that the data to back up that argument has never been systematically and completely collected and analyzed. So about a year ago, the executive committee of the Joint Board began a series of meetings with representatives from the Office of the State Engineer and the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District and others to discuss what we might be able to do about this deficiency. Those discussions led us to believe that a useful first step before undertaking a potentially costly request for proposals where you go out and ask the experts to produce the data, collect it, and analyze it. Well, the first step would be to review what's already out there, the published literature that happens to bear on this subject of the costs and benefits from Sloan. Dwayne Poole, who's an economist with the State Engineer's Office and suggested this first step, also suggested that Dr. Hearne might be an appropriate person to do this, both because of his academic familiarity with issues along the Missouri River, but also because of his expertise in applied economics. So then, Dr. Hearne. Well, Dr. Bob Hearne, he's been with NDSU's Department of Agribusiness and Applied Economics since 2002. His research there focuses on a number of things: water resource management institutions, water markets, protected area management, and the economic valuation of environmental goods and services. He has published extensively on water issues in North Dakota and throughout the world. He's been a faculty fellow of the Challey Institute for Global Innovation and Growth, a Fulbright scholar, and has professional experience not only here in the USA, but Europe, Africa, Latin America, and Asia. He didn't mention it in the little blurb he gave us for this biographical introduction, but in examining his full resume, I noticed that he began his long and successful career by 4 years in the Peace Corps, serving in both Latin America and Africa. So Bob, Dr. Hearne, thank you for being with us today, and we're really looking forward to your presentation.
Okay. I'm going to share this screen with us, and hopefully that'll come up. I thank the North Dakota Water Resource Districts Association and the Missouri River Joint Water Resource Board for this opportunity. I found doing this literature review very interesting, and I have a sticky keyboard, and let me try to Oh, I have to get my cursor over here. Okay. So, what is the Sloan project? Well, basically, the Sloan project was the development of the Missouri River basin post the 1944 Flood Control Act, which built a series of 5 mainstream dams. The 6th mainstream dam is the Fort Peck Dam, which was a WPA project built in the 1930s and finished in 1940. And there were also smaller dams along the Platte River and some tributaries of the Missouri. Completed between 1946 and 1966. Okay, in North Dakota, what happened is a lot of Missouri River bottomland was inundated with the formation of Lake Sakakawea and Lake Oahe, and traditional compensation, the political compensation for this loss, which is irrigation development, never really occurred to any substantial effect. So next couple slides are what an academic economist would consider the costs and the benefits of large dam projects. Generally, the cost of large dam projects includes financial costs of the construction, ongoing operation, and maintenance. It's the lost use of the inundated land and resources, including the lost economic and ecological use of the free-flowing river. That includes the recreation and the fisheries along the free-flowing river. The lost commerce and lost tax revenue from this lost resource use, and the disruption to community life, inundating communities and asking people to move to other places. As a federal project, this first thing, the cost of the financial construction was borne by the people of the United States of America, and not really particularly so much from North Dakota. And also in our case, this lost resource use included mineral resources. Coal, also a potential disruption of oil exploration in the inundated lands. The benefits of large dam projects. This is something that economists would know, and they follow basically the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers designated purposes for the reservoir operation of the Sloan dams. Flood control, water supply, and that's both for agriculture through irrigation and municipal industrial water supply. When we have large dams, this also includes interannual storage, so that if we have a 4, 5, 6 year flood, we would hope that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers would slowly draw down the reservoirs to supply these needs during a drought. We have a 4, 5, 6 year drought. Navigation, recreation, and hydroelectricity. Most of these benefits are brought to North Dakota to a greater or to a lesser degree. So the first part of this literature review was a lot of studies that were directly pertinent to North Dakota. Much of them were performed by my predecessors in the Department of Agricultural Economics, later Agribusiness and Applied Economics at North Dakota State. And this is a standard algorithm employed more or less throughout these studies. And what my colleagues did is developed a representative farm with different crop types and different rotations, both with and without irrigation. Then they estimated the returns to land and management using NDSU extension crop budgets for the representative farms. Sometimes they simulated price variation. So they used a 10-year moving average of prices. Sometimes they did not. And sometimes they, in the 70s and 80s, they needed to adjust for the true value of crops when the crop prices were heavily supported by agricultural policy. Once the on-farm part of the analysis was completed, generally regional analysis followed, and this used input-output analysis, a tool economists use to develop basically regional multipliers. So this would account for the fact that if there are crops produced in a certain region, that means that there are agribusinesses selling fertilizer, buying grain, doing transport, and all of those additional jobs that occur from changing land uses. And this analysis occurs through what we call input-output analysis and is often reported as a change in gross business volume. Okay, so studies dated back to the 1960s. An early study detailed lost acreage due to inundation, stream bank erosion. So the lost land was not only that was inundated, but some land riparian to the area downstream of Lake Sakakawea, where there was turbulent water that reduced the stream bank. 1978, J. Leach and Anderson did a fairly comprehensive benefit cost analysis, used this algorithm. They also talked about changes in wildlife habitat, hunting, waterborne recreation. They're discussed but not valued. They talked about and estimated losses from crops, pastures, cottonwood, minerals, annual losses in personal income and gross business volume was, in that time dollars, $34.1 million, $93.3 million in gross business volume, translated to 2019 with a GDP deflator was $107 million and close to $300 million in gross business volume. Leach and Schaffner did an additional study, reused much of the 1978 analysis, but looked at the impact of two alternative garrison diversion options. And this was a process of trying to develop irrigation in the Red River Basin side. And at the time, the study concludes that if a 250,000 acre GDU option would be enough to make North Dakota a net gainer in the Sloan project. Another 1970 study studied the feasibility of sprinkler irrigation. And this is in the garrison diversion area. Used a farmer's survey and basically concluded that there were low variable costs for sprinkler irrigation and positive returns for corn, silage, and alfalfa. Another company study discussed how we could finance the capital construction of on-farm sprinkler units, pivots in the area. There's a number of studies that assessed irrigation potential in smaller areas. Hivden co-authors studied the Apple Creek Irrigation Unit in Burleigh County. Increased income stream at a 7% discount rate was 49 million for the 32,000 acre unit, translates into 142 million in 2019 dollars. Another study above the Beaufort Trench Irrigation District near Williston looked at the alternative, which would be basically taking this irrigation district that was actually formed before the Sloan project and returning it to dry land. And Baltazari and co-authors suggest that this would be a loss of $197 per acre. That translates into $336 in 2019. And with secondary impacts, the 1990 state level impact was estimated to be 10 million or 17.1 million 2019 dollars, with a loss of 130 jobs. Okay, another study in 1991. Once again, Jay Leach and co-authors assessed the potential of impact development, and this is a smaller portion of the Garrison diversion, 75,000 acres. The returns depended upon the crop selection, which depended upon support payments and surcharges, etc. This ranged from $35 to $108 per acre, which translates into $60 to $180 in 2019 dollars. And this translated into a 48 to 77 million annual increase in regional business activity, which in 2019 dollars goes to 82 to 131. Okay, my colleague Dave Ripplinger and co-authors updated in 2014 analysis of potential irrigation in area adjacent to the McCluskey Canal, part of the Garrison diversion unit. Results showed irrigation benefits of $56.7 per acre, translates $61 per acre in 2019. And I'll note that they used 2014 prices, which I consider to be relatively high. I expect them to be higher than, let's say, 2016, 2017 prices. And Dean Bangsland and colleagues use Implan, which is a input outputs analysis, an estimated statewide impact of 82 million, translates to close to 89 million in today's dollars, with an accompanying 1.1 million in state and local government revenue. Are there questions for that part, or that's a nice place to pause?
Does anyone have any questions? Or we have everything muted, so you have to wave your arms or send a chat or send your, I think you can, if you're on Zoom.
Okay,
you
well,
should
this is a
unmute
shout
yourself.
out. We'll just ask people to make sure to put in your questions and I'll continue.
Very good.
Okay. I found a really nice book, and part of this is actually available on the internet. John Thorson's River of Promise, River of Peril. Thorson is what I consider to be a successful attorney, and writes a nice, very legible book, and discusses the Sloan project. and has a chapter on the benefits and costs to the states. One of the very important determinants of benefit costs of large dams now is electricity. And hydroelectricity, and that comes from the Sloan program, is kind of distorted in prices because it is not sold at market prices. Thorson notes that only 10% of planned irrigation was developed, very little in Dakotas. The value of hydroelectricity and recreation has increased over this period, 1944 to 1994. Navigation decreased. And going across the states, this is Thorson's calculation, which is not quantified, but big winners: Nebraska winners, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas. One of the principal reasons that you would see Minnesota to be a large winner is because of the beneficial electricity prices and the fact that they get a lot of they're sold a lot of the electricity from the Sloan dams. Losers: Colorado, Wyoming, and the big losers are the states where the inundation occurred: Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Another book updates this, and this was a committee that was put together by the National Research Council. It's a National Academies Press volume that's available on the internet, which looked at the potential of modifying Missouri River management to better accommodate ecosystem services, with a particular attention to endangered species, piper plover, least tern, and pallid sturgeon. A good chapter on the review of the geography, history, and institutional background of the river. A look at the economic outcomes of Missouri River management, and a lot of chapters on ecosystems and potential of improving ecosystem services and the adoption of adaptive management. So the chapter on economics, which will use a lot of U.S. Army Corps of Engineer analysis, which I'll present next, affirms that, okay, the wealth and population are concentrated in the lower basin. The river's commercial centers are no longer linked economically to the river. So places like Omaha, Kansas City, Sioux Falls, etc. The authors, Bismarck. The authors affirm that new developments in environmental economics have provided tools to estimate values for services such as recreation and ecosystem services, previously deemed to be intangible or uneconomic, listed in a lot of the studies provided by Jay Leach and co-authors, but not estimated. Annual benefits in the hundreds of millions of dollars come from hydropower, water supply, which includes irrigation, and flood damages. Annual damages in the tens of millions of dollars from recreation, and navigation benefits are measured in the millions of dollars. Okay, so U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a lot of documentation. During the 1990s, they provided within their master manual documents a lot of review and update studies. And they did a lot of economic analysis, but this was not an economic analysis of is the program good or not good, or what's good for this state or that state. But basically they went to analyzing how the whole system the benefits of the whole system would change with different operations of the reservoirs, different releases of the dams. So geared toward different management alternatives. Oh, okay. I spent a lot more time on that in the literature review, and it's a little technical for the presentation. The Bureau of Reclamation has done a lot of the impact analysis, environmental impact analysis, and released a lot of reports. Interesting is this final environmental statement of 1974, suggesting that the Garrison diversion is really the only way to basically compensate North Dakota for its changes in the Missouri River Basin, that there would be no alternatives of using the land and resources that would provide equivalent economic and social environmental benefits to the state. Few years later, this was challenged, and the Bureau of Reclamation did an analysis reviewing previous studies, suggesting a lot of their studies were non-professional. They did not account for the opportunity cost of the land for the proposed project, the opportunity cost of the water. They estimated the benefit of increased crop production of crops that were at the time in surplus, so receiving government price supports. And they did a poor job of estimating the costs, the economic costs of environmental impacts. This analysis, 1975 analysis, shows a federal government investment of $1,221 per acre, and with a repayment capacity of only $6.70 per acre. And that is updated here in 2019 prices. And that repayment capacity estimated in 1975 was possibly sufficient to cover operation and maintenance costs, but not the original investment. I really wanted to complement this study with looking at literature that showed the impact of the Pixome project on our Native American tribal reservations. Thorson, who I previously mentioned and said that the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, and Montana were big losers, also suggested that the special damage to the tribes was extremely large. And this includes the communities of the 3 affiliated tribes of the Fort Berthold Reservation and the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in North Dakota. In 1954, the Bureau of Indian Affairs estimated damages to the tribe, and this is only from Lake Oahe. And this includes moving residents from inundated areas, the market value of inundated land, lost timber and wildlife, potential lost land from irrigation, and general intangibles. Please note that when the tribes lost their land, they were not compensated through eminent domain as the European American farmers were, who had title to their land, but this estimates were brought for congressional appropriation, so that this study was basically brought to Congress and to see if Congress would appropriate money to compensate the tribes. Why were the tribes so damaged? Well, Schneider's does a good job in pointing out that you have engineering reasons why you want to locate dams in certain places. You want to locate dams so that they do not imply the need to inundate established cities. And at the time that included Williston, Bismarck, Pierre, Mobridge, and Sioux City. And there are engineering reasons why you wanted to dam areas where, you know, the topography was correct. And this basically meant inundating Indian lands. And also the tribes did not have the political influence to stop this, and they were not expected to contribute to the payments for the projects such as purchasing electricity. Lawson has a 2009 volume, which is very worthwhile. A long history of disputes, political impotence, failed negotiation, unrealized aspirations for reparations for lost lands and income. What I found particularly pertinent is that the volume does a good job discussing a transfer of riparian land from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to the state of South Dakota of land along the Lake Oahe. And this was promoted by Senator Daschle. And basically the transfer was opposed by most tribes who were suggesting that you shouldn't go around worrying about the state, should worry about the tribes. Also, this volume does a good job talking about reservoir recreation. It's increased in importance, but tribes have really not been able to capitalize on increased tourism. Okay, I have a few more additional studies. One by Caldwell criticized basically government use and abuse of both benefit cost analysis and environmental impact assessment, suggesting that these types of projects, including interbasin transfers, needs more consultation and coordination, especially with the International Joint Commission in Canada, and that environmental impact assessment should have peer review through international scientific communities. Article features strong language on inequities brought upon displaced white and Indian communities during dam inundation. You can find Olson and Morton's study very quickly on the internet. Talks a lot about the whole Missouri Basin, but basically has a nice little section about the lost communities in the inundated areas in North Dakota. Please note that this displaced farm families were compensated through eminent domain, but that money was not sufficient to bind suitable replacement land. My colleague Tony Prado looked at alternative benefit cost analysis systems by assessing what I would consider to be subjective weights to different services such as conservation, recreation, jobs, etc. Adding these together using what an economist would call linear utility. And from that, he assessed that adaptive management could be considered favorable. I'll give a shout out to a study that I did, basically going over the evolution of changes of the uses of the Missouri River Basin and changes of the management of the Missouri River Basin over the years. Okay, so conclusions, observations. Early studies showed the cost of inundation on North Dakota based upon 1950s land use. These studies can possibly be updated to account for 21st century land use, prices, regional multipliers. The Army Corps analysis from the 1990s updated benefits and costs of irrigation development, water supply, hydroelectricity, flood control, recreation. They focused their analysis on marginal changes to dam operations. And some of this analysis could be pertinent to future analysis. Incorporation of the 2000 initiatives to manage dams for provide better habitat ecosystem services. Really, none of that analysis has been done. We do not have good analysis of recreation values for the Sloan reservoirs in literature. Here are my recommendations for further analysis. We have to recognize that the system is here to stay. Any kind of analysis that says, oh, the costs are greater than the benefits really would not have a feasible political remedy. But I think it might be worthy of future research to look at. Maybe North Dakota should explore if it wants to take control of riparian land around Lake Oahe and Lake Sakakawea, and maybe do a better job of recreation development or access for water supply. And this is a very political issue. Also, I'll always mention this. I expect with global climate change that we will have longer droughts, bigger floods, and we need to manage our water better. And water will be valuable. The state of North Dakota has a lot of unallocated water in the Missouri River Basin. And I think it should explore different ways of economically using that within the Missouri River Basin, perhaps aquifer recharge, or perhaps expansion of pivot irrigation throughout the Missouri River Basin, which does not include interbasin transfers. Okay, thank you very much. I hope we have lots of questions and good discussion.
Thank you, Professor Hearne. Lots of study, lots of reading, and thanks for the recommendations for future analysis and future topics. I don't have any chat questions, but I will start with one. First off, you referenced and in your offer of suggestions for future initiatives, South Dakota's operation and management of the riparian areas of Lake Oahe, and I understand that was a key initiative of Senator Daschle's, and I think at the time President Clinton was supportive of doing so. My understanding is the management responsibility belongs to the state of South Dakota, but the ownership of the bed of Oahe remains federal, and the state manages the riparian area in the context of federal rules and regulations. Do I have that right? Or there's some, we often hear that we should do like South Dakota has done, but South Dakota doesn't have a carte blanche, I do not think.
And actually, when I'd done some reading on that, Lance, your name popped up. And I do not have, that sounds correct. And it seems to me that the transfer of riparian land to South Dakota might be beneficial in that local interests might be better in developing recreation resources. And maybe it's incorrect to say that it would be easier to permit extraction of water, such as North Dakota tried to do during the big spat between North Dakota and the Army Corps of Engineers over extracting water for oil development. Although there was a change in the law, some Water Resources Development Act suggested that if they were going to permit water, that the Army Corps could not charge for it.
Thank you for that. Professor Hearne, Michael Gunch has a question, so we will find him in here and see if he would be able to verbalize his question. So we'll unmute you, Michael, if we can find you among the 60 participants here. Okay, you should be able to speak, Michael.
I guess I'm out here and unmuted. I actually had two studies. I was chatting and typing in the other one here, but I'll just go to this one. Dr. Hearne, were there any actual payments to the tribes that resulted from the recommendations to Congress or the evaluations that you're aware of?
Not that I am aware of. I am aware that when I visited Fort Yates and talked to people at the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, they said they got nothing. And that does not surprise me. I would expect that within that loss in volume dammed Indians, that there would be talk of some compensation. But I'm not really, it's not on the tip of my head right now.
Okay. Second question I've got, well, we've got recreational values on Lake Sakakawea that have been done by North Dakota Game and Fish and others. From your literature search, you're saying that there's no larger or global review of recreation relative to the PIC Sloan plan?
I would expect that the North Dakota Fish and Game has visitation and maybe has used some benefits transfer from other studies, suggesting that, okay, this is the value of a recreation day doing this. I don't think we've had any comprehensive studies on that did that type of analysis in the state of North Dakota or that area.
Okay, because I'm familiar with the one that the Game and Fish has done, and my curiosity is whether or not, and I've not checked obviously, whether the state of South Dakota or Montana or others have done similar analyses for their reservoirs for recreational values. Thank you.
Okay.
Lance, can you hear me? I think I'm unmuted. This is Ken Royce.
I hear you.
Yes, go ahead, Ken.
Dr. Hearne, I think in the early 1990s, and I'm doing this from memory, there was a settlement called the JTAC settlement, JTAC, that's Joint Tribal something, where the Corps of Engineers allocated over 150 million, about $150 million to the three tribes, and almost $100 million to Standing Rock, if I remember it right. We could Google it and find out, but I think between the two tribes, they've got a settlement, at least what they would consider a partial settlement for economic damages, collectively of about $250 million. Now, whether they ever got that money or whether they're just drawing the interest on that money, I don't recall how that all worked out. It happened back in the 90s, but I do recall tribal leadership talking about the JTAC settlement over the years about how they would get money from it. I think they were drawing interest. So that's something that I think the tribes did get from the government as part compensation. And of course, when they did the reformulation in 1984 of the GDU unit, when they did the reformulation in 1984, the tribes got some small amount for water delivery projects, you know, less than $10 million. Most of that money went to the state. I don't remember that number either. And of course, Dakota Water Resource Act allocated $200 million under the premise it was compensation for lands being lost on the dam. So I think there's been some effort by the government to compensate the tribes. Well, I don't know how fruitful it's been.
Thank you. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that there's more out there.
Yeah, but I do have a question for you or for anybody in the group. So it looks like from the presentation, a lot of the benefits from the project would flow from irrigation benefits. So my question to the group and to you, I'm not aware of any irrigation project in North Dakota, and then maybe there are some, but I don't know of any, that have been built with any federal dollars. Now there's federal support, you know, with preference power or project power to some qualified irrigation projects. But as far as actual construction, I don't know if anybody has used federal dollars. It's always been state or local, I think. And so that's one question. Does anybody know of any federal input on irrigation? And the second question is, what difference do the dams make to irrigation in North Dakota? Wouldn't it have been just as easy for North Dakota to have irrigation with or without the dams?
Okay, my literature review came up with the small irrigation district that is upstream from Williston. Okay, that was partially inundated by Lake Sakakawea. So actually the Sloan project actually reduced this irrigation system. Okay, but that was a USBR development.
This is Greg. I'm aware of the Fort Clark Irrigation District. That's a Bureau project as well, south of Stanton. Not very functional at this point.
Okay, yeah, Buford Trench. What large dams do to help irrigation that would not be possible without the system is interannual storage. So run-of-the-river systems would be possible in North Dakota, but when we have dry years, often there's not enough water in the river to supply water for a irrigation project. So the run-of-the-river system would turn into a dry land system during drought periods. So large dams support irrigation through interannual.
Fire, what do you want?
So Dr. Hearne, are you basically saying it's more reliable?
Yeah, you would have a more reliable source of water if you have an irrigation system that receives water from a large dam or a river which has a large dam storage, because you have a more reliable source of water during drought years. And in this decade, in this millennium, yeah, it's the benefits of large dams are increasingly less and less to do with irrigation. Large dam systems provide hydroelectricity and recreation, flood control, but a lot of the irrigation systems that came out of large dam construction have not really had good returns.
Could anyone else answer, Ken asked for the general question, if anybody else on the call has a notion or a awareness of any federal investment. Certainly, as Ken said, there's been some support and a few districts are eligible for project use power for the first lift. But in general, it doesn't seem like we've had a great deal of federal actual investment in irrigation to make that work. Are there any? I think you can unmute yourself, except those of you on the phone will have to unmute you. So we have unmuted the folks on the telephone, except for that 605 number, Julie. Okay.
Lance, this is Bruce Engelhardt. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, Bruce.
I'm not aware of any other irrigation districts than the two that were mentioned, but I did want to say a couple of things about the benefits of dams for irrigation. I asked to disagree a little bit on what was said about the benefit. One of the things that the Garrison Dam, Lake Sakakawea in particular, does do to benefit irrigation, particularly if you're talking about Garrison diversion, is it provides additional head to the water. That's, you know, what makes the water be able to flow through the McCluskey Canal and distribute it.
Bruce, this is Wade. You were interrupted when you were talking about the Missouri River during the 1930s. Can you repeat that, please?
Basically what I was saying was, you know, the records show that even in the worst of the drought of the 1930s, there was plenty of water in the Missouri River here at Bismarck. You know, there, I can't remember. I think the lowest flow we had was 9,000 CFS in the worst of the 30s. That's 18,000 acre feet a day. And, you know, that wasn't all summer long. That was the absolute minimum. And the dams are designed that would be all the water that would be at the end of the 30s drought. There's no storage left in the reservoirs to apply to things like irrigation, navigation, etc.
What you mean, Bruce, is like, so even supplying like the headworks of the McCluskey Canal are challenged if the reservoir, in this case, Sakakawea, is reduced elevations because of an extended drought. The differential won't allow it to supply the headwaters of McCluskey Canal to supply any irrigation therein.
My recollection is that actually they could get the McCluskey Canal headworks to work. They actually had it set up so they could change the pumps. I don't remember what the elevation is, but it's something else. When the lake falls to some elevation, they actually have to change the pumps at Snake Creek Pumping Plant. You know,
Ryan or Kip from Garrison Diversion, do you have any light you can shed on that?
Lance, this is Dwayne. Yeah, at Snake Creek Pumping Plant, we've got what's called low head and high head pumps. And as the elevation of the lake falls, at some point, you'd have to use the low head pumps. I think it was last summer, if memory serves me right, was the first time they'd ever switched out one of those pumps that had never been used before that. So yeah, Bruce is right. They do have the ability to use a different pumping setup at Snake Creek if the level of the lake falls. Kip would be better versed, but he's on administrative leave today.
Dwayne, this is Ken Royce. Let me add something to that. Here's the irony of the situation. One of the authorized purposes which would be a benefit to North Dakota, was irrigation. That's how it got sold, that and flood control for Bismarck, right? That's how it got sold in North Dakota. Flood control to Bismarck and irrigation for 1 million acres. Now we're in a situation where the Corps is saying that maybe the area that we want to irrigate, which is around McCluskey Canal, is in danger of having adequate water for irrigation based on how they may operate that dam. So just by an administrative procedure, Dwayne, and you can expound upon this, and I'm talking about the Snake Creek embankment issue where they may lower Lake Audubon based on drought conditions. Just by administrative procedure, they've done away with one of the 7 authorized purposes, or at least partially for North Dakota. They'll take away all the irrigation from the McCluskey Canal if they lower Lake Audubon. Now, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but it seemed to me that that was one of the big benefits for North Dakota with irrigation. And it still could be a big benefit, although it's going to involve state investment, not federal investment. I don't think the feds are going to invest any dollars to build little pumping stations and develop irrigation districts. Maybe they will, but they haven't to date, except for, I guess, Lewis and Clark, you mentioned, Greg, and Buford Trenton maybe got some federal dollars. But it looks to me like the benefit for irrigation is a diminished benefit if they manage Lake Audubon in the way they think they're going to manage it. So there's a potential benefit, at least in a portion of the project, that goes away just by the stroke of a pen, just by an administrative action. And there's no, there doesn't seem to be any debating the Corps on that issue. They're going to do it. They say they're going to do it, and they're going to do it. We get a drought situation, they drop Lake Audubon, irrigation suffers along McCluskey Canal. And that's whatever that is, 25, 28, 30,000 acres of potentially irrigable land.
Yeah, it's right now the Corps did some testing at the dam, or the Bureau did, I don't remember which, and they felt that there was water moving underneath the dam, and so it was constructed that there could be a 67-foot differential between Lake Audubon and Lake Sakakawea. And so with this water movement under the dam, they have reduced that to somewhere in the 30s and the 40s, somewhere in there. I can't remember right off the top of my head. But the biggest benefit that we have received from the federal government on the irrigation in recent years is that we could never get any irrigation along the dam because they'd never give an operator more than a 1-year water service contract. And who's going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in an irrigation system if you're only guaranteed water for 1 year? And so finally the Bureau came up with the 40-year water service contract, and now we're slowly seeing irrigation development along the canal. And the other issue that just kind of came up, which could even help that more now, is that the federal government has decided that they've been overcharging users for pumping power. And so they've gone to, we were at about 13 cents or 13 mils, something like that. And now they've dropped that down to about 2 starting next year. And so that, I mean, there's people on rural co-ops that could only dream of getting an electrical cost of that. And so we're hoping that spurs development of irrigation along the canal. State Water Commission has a 50% cost share up to the property line of a landowner on developing irrigation. And so the state has been very helpful in developing irrigation. But as far as the federal government's been, until they came up with the 40-year water service contract along the canal, they really weren't. I mean, that's the only thing that they did to really promote irrigation, is come up with the 40-year water service agreement. And then they built the canal. I mean, that was built for that purpose, but then they kind of failed to realize that you had to make the water available to farmers for more than 1 year at a time.
Professor Hearne, you, for this review, you were asked to study literature specifically, and you talked about some next steps. And so some of those might be actual economic studies of the value, maybe in today's dollars and today's agriculture, today's production capacity, what the investment that we should be pushing the federal government to make to repay the state of North Dakota for the loss that it did incur with those acres. We we talk about it in general nature, and you've done a lot of literature review, but among your topics of future consideration were what next? What should we be evaluating, and what kind of studies should we be initiating?
If you ask me, I'm not optimistic that if you came up with a big number and walked to Washington and said, this is the big number that we didn't get, that you'll get something. I think it's a better strategy to figure out what you want in compensation. And then do the analysis with basically the understanding that people in Washington actually do understand that there's a lot that North Dakota hasn't gotten. I think the better strategy is to figure out what marginal thing you want from Washington. And certainly 40-year water service leases and changing the management of, or the water levels at Lake Audubon, et cetera. These are things that can be argued. I guess my perception is once you get into interbasin transfers, there's always this very large political mess. So that eventually the water will be valuable enough that it will be valuable within the basin. And so development of pivot irrigation systems, not along the McCloskey Dam, but along the river and along the riparian land off of the lakes. To me, that would be potentially a bigger strategy. I don't know the numbers about the feasibility of this, but I perceive that more and more it will be more feasible to develop irrigation within the basin. Other things like riparian land and recreation development.
Are there any other questions, folks? We will unmute the phone lines again, since we don't have a way for them to text us or send a chat message. Did anybody on the telephones have a question for our presenter, Professor Hearne?
This is
Dr. Hearne, this is, pardon me. Dr. Hearne, this is Ken Royce. Did you, in your literature search, did you come across any type of reports or studies that might have quantified the flood protection that has been provided to the Bismarck-Mandan area? And that's essentially what we're talking about, the dam, Garrison Dam protecting Bismarck-Mandan over the life of the project versus what that flood protection might be for Pierre or Sioux Falls or Kansas City or St. Joe, Missouri. I mean, are those type of studies out there? Did you stumble across anything like that?
I'm not sure it's specific to what you said. There was big analysis done, and I believe post 2011 when there was a flood, or maybe it's 2009, and benefits of flood control for different areas was projected, and basically they tried to analyze how they could have managed the reservoirs better if they did certain things to certain areas, or they released water sooner or later. And there was a lot of analysis that the Army Corps done at that period And that would have detailed damages to Bismarck or whatever without quantifying that across the 50 years. And it would not surprise me that that information is out there.
Wade, you also had a question.
Yes, Dr. Hearne, excuse me. You've outlined a number of recommendations, and I do not disagree with any of them, but with the pressure that the hydroelectric generation industry is coming under recently, do you think it would be feasible, or could it even occur that the state of North Dakota look at creating additional hydropower electrical generation that could be sold out of state?
My perception of North Dakota is that it's very flat, and that hydroelectricity is restricted to a relatively small head. And there are larger debates across the world about how much additional hydroelectricity can be built, because you know, the easy or the best sites for dams have already been taken, and all of the environmental impacts of dams are becoming greater a concern. No, I don't think there's additional hydroelectric capacity. There is issues about how the hydroelectricity is sold to the WAPDA, the Western Area Power Development or whatever. And I would assume that it would not benefit North Dakota to really I would assume it would not benefit North Dakota to continue that debate. I think we're getting our share of concessionary prices in some of our co-ops, et cetera.
Are there any other questions or observations? Any suggestions? We'll be moving shortly here to sort of next steps. As we talked at the outset, the Missouri River Joint Board was the lead on this request for a request of literature related to the impacts of the Sloan on the Upper Missouri Basin states, and Garrison Board, the Garrison Diversion helped with the costs of that. So it was a partnership between those two entities. So we'll be closing out this conversation with a conversation and discussion about maybe the next steps with respect to research. But are there any concluding questions, comments or observations that anybody on the call would like to make? We, again, we'll unmute the phones for those of you who can't unmute yourself. And if you're not able to unmute yourself, great, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I think in one of your slides, you mentioned an article that said that the means and methods are now available to evaluate recreation. Did I understand that correctly?
I think we've done a much better job of understanding and being able to estimate the value of recreation in specific cases. We've had a caller come in and say, you know what, the North Dakota Fish and Game has done this, and part of it would surprise me, but part of it doesn't surprise me. I would expect that there would be data on how many people are doing what, how many visitor days, and actually that you would take that visitor days and you would use certain analysis that have been done in certain areas, and you can say, okay, yeah, the value of this recreation opportunity in Lake Sakakawea is this many hundreds of millions of dollars or this many tens of millions of dollars. I think that is much more feasible. And I also, in the same slide, suggested that there is non-use values, and this is analysis that would suggest, okay, that there are ecosystem services that come along with the river. Some of them are something that we don't in particular use. So these are fish species that are not game. So they're not allowed to catch, and there's endangered species. And we've developed techniques to basically put large values to how people assess the maintenance of nature without hunting and recreation, etc. The other thing that we do not have, that I have seen, is people have done analysis on managing the dams for ecosystem services, and I just don't know the correlation between managing a dam system for ecosystem services, which would be pallid sturgeon and piping plover, and the economic recreation, which would be the fish species in the reservoirs that people want to catch. And we don't know the interaction between that I have not seen that. I would suspect that there are people interested in trying to figure that out, but I just haven't seen it.
Professor Hearne, is there a final report? I mean, you've summarized, I'm sure, a great deal of work with respect to trying to squeeze this into an hour and a half, but the studies that you've identified and that you summarized for us here today, is that available in a more, I presume, more extensive written report?
There is a literature review, and actually I should send Missouri River Joint Water Board an update, because I've corrected some mistakes in the development of this presentation. But that is property of the Missouri River Joint Water Board.
Okay, well, very good. I should have mentioned at the outset that we have recorded this presentation, and so your questions and the interaction and the presentation that Professor Hearne has provided for us will be recorded. I'm not sure yet how we'll make that available, but there's been folks who've messaged me during the course of this conversation who may want to review it later. In addition, we will coordinate with the Missouri River Joint Board and the Garrison Diversion Board about the use and the access to that study that we've been talking about for this 90-minute conversation. Barring any questions, I think I will turn it to our co-hosts here, Greg Lang, representing the Missouri River Joint Board, and Ken Royce, chairman of the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District, to maybe offer some concluding remarks. Thank you on my behalf for our first run at this virtual session, Professor Hearne. I think it seemed to work very well from our end. We definitely had a sleepless night here wondering how this was going to come off, but I think it was terrific. met and exceeded my expectations. So Greg and Ken, unless there's any concluding remarks you have, Professor Hearne.
If I could, before they start, please, Lance.
Sure.
Dr. Hearne, when you send that report to the Missouri River Joint Board, could you also send it to Dwayne DeCray and Ken Royce by virtue of their involvement in the funding of this?
Okay, so
I
Greg,
think when you see-
Wade, Dwayne Poole, Ken Joyce, and
Dwayne DeCray.
Dwayne DeCray. Okay,
I think I can say that the Missouri River Joint Board would feel that the review is not specifically owned by the Joint Board, but also by the Garrison Diversion. Ken or Greg, would you agree?
Yeah, I agree.
Certainly. And Bob, I have those email addresses, and if it's not already posted on our website, we'll make sure that the final product is posted there as well.
okay.
Ken?
Well, let me make a few comments on this. I think the reason that this is such an important issue for the state of North Dakota, well, first let me say this, the Garrison Diversion Board, our interest in Missouri River ties right to our mission statement. Our mission statement for Garrison Diversion, and we are kind of a misunderstood board. I think most of the people in North Dakota do not understand they don't understand what Garrison Diversion does, probably how we operate and what our goals are, but our mission statement is a very simple mission statement. We want to provide a reliable, high quality, and affordable water supply to the benefit of the people of North Dakota. Now, it doesn't say Missouri River water, but you can't provide a statewide water supply without talking about Missouri River. And that brings us back to why we're looking at this issue. I think some of you or most of you know that there's been tremendous effort by out-of-state interests to keep North Dakota from using water in North Dakota. As we speak, the state of Missouri is suing the state of North Dakota and Garrison Diversion over the attempt to take water from the Missouri River to the Red River Valley to provide a project that would supplement those supplies in terms of a drought. And by the way, a drought in the Red River Valley would impact the entire state of North Dakota significantly. That's the economic engine of North Dakota, is the valley. That has to have a dependable water supply, which, if we go back to a 1930s drought, would not have a dependable water supply, and industry will not invest in that valley without dependable water. And that dependable water has to come from the Missouri River. Garrison Diversion, at least since the year 2000, has spent tens of millions of dollars doing studies on this. There's no alternative. There's no in-basin solution. There's no groundwater. You can't import water from Minnesota. They've got water, but they won't give it to us. You can't rely upon adequate rainfall. You have to use Missouri River water to stabilize eastern North Dakota. And you have to do that to allow industry to develop. Now, as we speak, Missouri is suing us. Every time we try to take water out of the river, we get sued by one of the 3 M's, Missouri, Manitoba, or Minnesota. Somebody's got a complaint against us, and we don't get a lot of support from the federal government. They are as bad as those 3 people. They've got regulations all the time that limit our use. The most current one was back in 2005 when they wanted to charge the state of North Dakota to take water out of the system. We all remember that, right? Surplus water issue, charge the state to take water out of the system. Now that's been successfully sidelined. And so a study like this is important because we need to be able to demonstrate to the federal government that North Dakota has given up so much, 550,000 acres of prime land, and all the benefits that would flow from those 550,000 acres. I'm talking about the crops that could have been developed, the income tax that could have been collected, the wages and employment that would have been generated. All those benefits for the last 70 years are gone. And what do we get? We do get flood control for Bismarck-Mandan. Is it worth that? I don't know. I live in Bismarck. I like flood control, but there might have been a cheaper alternative. We didn't get the 1 million acre irrigation project that was promised. And we did get a water supply project, but that water supply, as Bruce Engelhardt said, would have been there with the free flow of the river anyway. Matter of fact, the way the river's operated, it probably is detrimental. You know, they raise the darn reservoir when there's too much. When there's too much water, we become a working reservoir for the state of Missouri. Just keep the water in North Dakota and flood out the docks. And when there's not enough water, lower the reservoir so they can have water, Missouri and Kansas, the downstream states, and take the docks out of water and damage the recreational interest and damage the irrigation intake structures. And so something like this was needed, we thought, from the garrison diversion standpoint. I think a lot of people think hard numbers are needed. So when some of us, or all of us, want to go to a Corps of Engineers meeting and talk about federal programs that affect how we use the river and how we use the system, we can say to them, look, here's what we've invested as a state of North Dakota. Don't you think we should get some type of consideration? Don't you think we should get some federal support when we want to use our water? These type of issues have to be addressed. And so that's why this study, this is the first step. A lot of us have called this the phase 1 part of the project. Identify what literature is out there. And that's what Dr. Hearne has done. Now, the question is, do we do phase 2? Do we take the available literature, that and maybe other pieces that we maybe didn't talk about? We try to draw conclusions from it so we can make that argument with hard numbers. We could do that. That's probably going to be a lot a more costly type of a phase 2 than what we spent to date. We could do that, or we could rely upon anecdotal stories and incidences, and then we go to these meetings and talk about our personal experiences and see if that flies. It hasn't flown now for 70 years trying to get the Corps to modify their operation of the river. But those are the issues we have in front of us. Greg, I'll let you wrap it up, but that'd be the spot. That'd be the thoughts from the garrison diversion folks, I'm sure.
Well, just to say to the other people out there watching, if you have more questions or comments or suggestions for where we go from here, please be willing to share them. And we'll try to make sure that the fuller report that Dr. Hearne referred to is posted, made available both through State Water Commission and through our website. But finally, Dr. Hearne, again, thank you for the study. Thank you for doing the presentation today, and thanks to all who attended.